Okay, so now I'm going to start my lesson on verses 1 to 4 of The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe. Just bear in mind that the language here is quite tricky, and you're going to have to pay attention because there are words here that you've never come across before. In fact, there are words in this poem that I've never come across before. So let's get going. We'll start with verse 1. I'll read it aloud first of all. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered, weak and weary, over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as of someone gently rapping at my chamber door. "'Tis some visitor," I muttered, tapping at my chamber door. Only this and nothing more. Okay, so we're setting the scene. It's almost like a story rather than a poem. We've got once, right? One time, like once upon a time. Upon a midnight dreary. Okay, dreary means depressing. If the weather's dreary, it means it's grey, it's cold. And a midnight. Okay, remember we've got midnight, which is a time between one day and the next. It's one of the, always in horror and in fantasy, there's that, when you reach the border, when one thing turns into another, that's when crazy things start happening. So midnight is quite relevant. While I pondered, okay, pondered means to think and sort of, if you're pondering, you're lost in your thoughts, okay? Weak and weary, that weak, we know, and weary is like, when you're weary, means like you're tired of everything, you're tired of something. You could be weary of life, you could be weary of the same boring conversations, okay? Over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore. So this person is pondering over, okay, many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore. Quaint is unusual, okay, and curious means strange. Volume is like when you have a set of books and you have like part 1, part 2, part 3. The books are in volumes, okay? In the old days before they had internet, you would have everything written down in books and people would have masses and masses of books. But the interesting thing is this person is reading, but they're reading something called forgotten lore. Lore is fairy tales, is stories of the past. It's not something. This is not factual. This is some kind of a fiction. Okay, so in a way, he's tired. The narrator is tired, and he's sitting there on this disc with all these books, and it says forgotten lore. Okay, so these are stories of long ago, right? Something we're talking about the past. We're not talking about now, and we're talking about things that stories that people don't relate to anymore, which is interesting. So while I nodded, nodding is what happens when you sit up and your head can't stay straight and you're falling asleep, nearly napping. Okay, so he's in a kind of dreamlike state. Suddenly there came a tapping. Okay, he hears a tapping, as of someone gently rapping at my chamber door. Rapping is the same as tapping. It's a sort of sound that you make when you knock on wood. There's a rapping sound. Chamber. Okay, so he talks about his bedroom as a chamber. Okay, that is a bedroom. And now he says tis. Tis means it is, okay? It's some visitor, I muttered, tapping at my chamber door. Only this and nothing more. Now, why would he think that there'd be something more? Only this and nothing more. What's he imagining the person to be? Why does he even ask a question about who's knocking at his door? He's sort of reassuring himself that the thing at his door is just a visitor, but then you ask yourself, what else could it be? What else is he expecting? Already we have this mood which is very which is suspenseful, right? It's depressing because we've got this, he's weary and the weather's dreary, yeah, and he's why is he reading all this stuff? Why is he reading all these volumes of forgotten lore, right? And also it's dreamlike, okay? He's like kind of not really fully awake. Do we know anything about the narrator apart from that? Nothing at all. Okay, so let's go on to the next verse. I will be discussing the devices and the rhyme scheme at another time. Right now we're just getting into the meaning of the verses. Verse 2. So I'll read it out loud. Ah, distinctly I remember. It was in bleak December, and each separate dying ember wrought its ghost upon the floor. Eagerly I wished the morrow, vainly I had sought to borrow from my books surcease of sorrow, sorrow for the lost Lenore, for the rare and radiant maiden whom the angels named Lenore, nameless here forevermore. Okay, so now we're adding more details to the scene, to what happens at the beginning of the poem, the setting. Okay, so it was bleak December. December is winter time. Bleak means depressing again. Really, I don't know anything for you. Okay, December. December is also, this is also a transitional period, right? It's a transition between one year and the next, right? So you've got midnight and you've got December. Okay, and each separate dying ember. An ember is what you have left over from a fire. When you light a fire and the fire goes out and you've got these glowing embers, all right? So we've got these dying embers that kind of doesn't make us think of very nice things. Wrought its ghost. Wrought is when it wrought something, it's shaping it. It's like you shape metal, okay? When you shape metal with a high temperature, that's wroughting. And here it's the ember is wrought its ghost upon the floor. So you've got this very distinct imagery of the narrator looking at the dying fire, and he sees the end of the red bits, and they're kind of putting strange shadows on the floor. But the fact that there's a ghost is not a coincidence, because as we've already learnt a bit, Poe was absolutely obsessed with fantasy and ghosts and memories of the past. All of his characters and his stories are obsessed with the past. They're swallowed up by it. So again, we've got a ghost just at the beginning of the poem. Eagerly I wished the morrow. The morrow is, I wish that it would be tomorrow. He has had enough of now. He wants already the time to be past. Okay? Eagerly means, obviously when you're waiting for something eagerly, that means you have a lot of expectation, meaning he is not happy with what is going on right now. He just wishes it would be over and done with. And the morrow, interesting, if we go back, morrow, and we're going back to when it was December, is morrow could be the new year, right? This could be the end of December, and he could be looking forward to the new year. Vainly I had sought to borrow. Vainly means in vain, which means that unsuccessfully. You try to do something and it's vainly, it means you don't succeed. I had sought to borrow, okay? But it's not borrowing as in the usual sense of the word, because it's borrowing from my books surcease of sorrow. Here we go. I sought to borrow. Sought means I tried to borrow from my books. Which books? Which books? The books about lost and forgotten lore, the books about stories from long ago. Surcease means the end, okay, of sorrow. Sorrow for the lost lore. So let's sort of untie this a little bit. He wants to read his books in order to escape from sorrow. Sorrow is sadness. Sorrow for the lost Lenore. Okay, who's Lenore? Somebody very important. Lost can mean two things. It can mean literally lost, but it could also mean, when you talk about your lost loved ones, it could mean that someone died, okay? For the rare and radiant maiden, notice the rare, radiant, I've forgotten the technique, but you'll find out later. The rare and radiant maiden, okay, maiden is a young woman, okay? Usually a virgin. whom the angels named Lenore, right? This, it's not that I call her Lenore, the angels call her Lenore. This is somebody who he has very strong feelings for indeed, if he says that the angels called her Lenore. That this, she's barely a human, she's more like a goddess or an angel. Okay, nameless here forevermore. So nameless, this is a very interesting word. What does it mean by nameless? What happens when a person loses their name? That means that no one knows who they are. People are more frightened about being forgotten than they are about almost anything else. And this loved one is someone who's forgotten, whose name has gone to dust. This is like a very depressing statement. And then we've got the evermore, meaning from this point on, nobody will know who she is. So we as the readers imagine that this Lenore is dead. She's passed on, okay? And she passed on in a tragic way and at a young age because she's a maiden, right? So there's a lot to think about. And now, we thought it was depressing at the beginning, but it's getting worse, okay? Because now we know that the narrator, he's on his own and he's depressed about somebody who he's lost, somebody who was very dear to him. Okay, next verse. And the silken, sad, unsettling rustling